The 511th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! Got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you tonight about 4.5, now 5 hours or so after Carolina secured their third straight win as they dismantled Virginia 81-66 in a game that wasn't even as close as the final score would indicate. And we're here to talk about that win and break down another impressive performance from Carolina. We'll take a look at the box score. We'll deliver the quote of the game from head coach Hubert Davis, have the stat of the game, more thoughts, takeaways, and hand out our game balls. But we'll go ahead and get right into the initial recap portion of this episode. As I mentioned, Carolina wins 81-66. They started the game on a 21-2 run, on their way to winning their third straight game where they have not trailed, the first time they've done so since 2018-2019. And they were led by Jalen Withers, who continues his strong play since being inserted into the starting lineup. He had a 16-point, 10-rebound, double-double. He was 4 of 6 from three. He was by far and away, I thought, the best player on the court today for Carolina. 4 starters scored in double figures. 5 overall Tar Heels reached the double-digit scoring plateau, and it was all fueled by the best three-point per shooting game of the season percentage-wise, as Carolina knocked in 9 of their 16 threes. You round that up, that equates to 57%. We used this game as, I guess, the bookmark, if you will, of were we willing to buy into what this team had done leading up to this game. This is now 3 straight wins. It's 4 out of 5. But we said they had to play and win this game. And maybe even went as far to say how it looked would really determine if we would start to buy in or not. If they controlled the game and won the game going away, maybe Carolina has something here. If this was a game that they won in the final minute or two, maybe this is just a team that isn't capable of blowing out mediocre to below average basketball teams, which Virginia happens to be this year. But this game was, for all intents and purposes, over at the first media timeout. That's how strong Carolina came out of the gate. They ran away from Virginia. They've won 3 in a row. They've won 4 out of 5. And it feels like now, since this team has been on the NCAA tournament bubble for the last month and a half, now's the first time we can really believe they might be playing meaningful basketball come the month of March.
Yeah, I mean, you use the comparison when we were last talking about the last recap edition of the podcast. We after the state game, I mean, you said it. You said that it was kind of like flirting with someone, and then now you're kind of in that full-on crush mode. I think that's kind of where you're at with Carolina, because you really love what you saw from Jalen Withers. You love what you saw from Ian Jackson again today, and those were the two guys that we pointed out here were going to be key for Carolina. If they were going to keep this going, they needed those guys to continue to perform at the level that they had been recently. You get another day from RJ Davis where he struggles to shoot from the field, just 3 of 14. But it's everybody else that steps up. And when you've got Withers playing the way that he is, knocking down 4 shots from the outside, Ian Jackson a perfect 3 for 3 from the outside, and then you get 14 points from Vin Allen Lubin and 11 from Drake Powell, it just seems like everybody is starting to kind of wake up at the same time for Carolina. And while RJ Davis may be struggling just a little bit, the good news is his teammates are picking him up. And this team now, starting to even get a little bit more depth. Cade Tyson comes in, plays some important minutes for Carolina in this game, and actually looks pretty serviceable. So, Carolina is starting to, they're guys that need to break out or starting to break out. And in the process, it seems like they are somehow starting to get a little bit deeper. And that's why Carolina right now is starting to look like the team that we thought they were capable of being earlier on in this conference season.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, for me at least, after today, I'm full-blown crushing, and this team has me blushing. This is the best basketball this team has played this year. It's been consistent. It's been fun to watch. And look, it goes back to that old adage that Roy Williams said, but it's true. Everything looks better when the ball goes in the basket, and that's right. But I think there's just a different energy. There's a different feel around this team to where it looks like they're having fun. They look like they are enjoying playing the game of basketball. And I think something that I've really tried to, really differentiate is, man, when Carolina had their bad season 2 years ago, that was a group that did not like each other. Like, there were issues that existed beyond the basketball court that led to what happened on the court. I have never felt the same with this team. It's always felt like this team has been frustrated with the result. This team has been frustrated with losing, but they've never been frustrated with one another. And now that they're starting to win, and they're starting to win more regularly and look and have the type of feel of what we thought this team could have been back in October going into November, you're seeing them celebrate the success of their teammates. You're seeing them really enjoy watching how others are thriving. Because like you said, man, RJ ain't playing well. RJ ain't shot the ball great the last 2 games. He's not having his head, looking at the floor. He's not out here pouting or whining. He's up there cheering for Jalen Withers, who's making shots, Ian Jackson, who's making shots. And I think also you've seen some more accountability from these guys when they mess up. Like Seth Trimble committed a god-awful turnover today and immediately said, my bad. That's on me. And that's something you haven't really seen throughout the year, where when guys messed up, it was just like, oh, oh, well. Now there's a lot more self-accountability that's happening on the court, also resulting, though, in Hubert Davis pulling guys out of the game when they commit these types of mistakes, commit these types of turnovers. Is it probably because you look at the calendar and it's already the last Saturday in February? Yes, I do think that does play a part in that. But I also do think that whatever happened after the Clemson game, we cannot understate, we cannot undervalue, because Carolina's been different. And maybe all it took was for them going on the road and getting punked by a football school for them to say, man, this ain't right. This ain't cool. It's different when you're losing these games in the final minute, the final moments. But when you went on the road and you were as non-competitive as you were for the 30 minutes against a school that only half pretends to care about basketball, maybe that was the turning point from this group. We'll have to wait and see. I think right now the biggest thing that I'm fighting is it too little too late? Did Carolina find this too little too late? Because with the way this conference is set up, we know how big the Duke game is going to be anyway. It's the Duke game. They blew you out the first matchup in Cameron. It also happens to be RJ Davis's final home game in Chapel Hill. There's a lot of pressure to win that game. And if you don't, you probably put yourself in a position to, at maybe a minimum, make the ACC tournament final in Charlotte the following week. Something I think Carolina is capable of doing, but it's too hard to predict how far this team can go when you got to win maybe 3 games in 3 days or potentially 4 games in 4 days. So the good news is, and the reason why we ran a little bit late tonight getting live, is you're starting to see this tournament bubble is starting to kind of soften. And there's starting to open up a much more clearer path for Carolina than maybe we would have thought originally a week or so with some of the losses that these teams on the bubble right now are taking. And I've said all year long that Carolina's metrics would suggest that they're a tournament team. You look at them in KenPom, their net, and some of the other metrics that we use in college basketball. And I still believe that. But you got to have the amount of wins that matter. And it looks like it's still pointing towards that Duke game being one that's going to carry a lot of weight for Carolina in terms of their NCAA tournament hopes. Let's now take a look at the box score here. It's a pretty one for the Heels. Carolina shot 48% from the field. They were 27 of 56. On the flip side, Virginia shot 45%. They were 24 of 53. A big difference tonight. 3-point shooting, Carolina very efficient, very deliberate. They were 9 of 16 from deep. That equates, as I mentioned, to 57% shooting, the best mark of the year. On the flip side, Virginia, just 6 of 22. That factors out to 27%. The Heels were efficient and effective from the foul line. They were 18 of 22. That's 82%. Virginia they were 12 of 13, but Carolina +6 in makes, +9 in attempts. Turnovers, 10 turnovers for Carolina led to 14 points for Virginia. Carolina forced 9 turnovers, and that led to 13 points for them going the other way. The Heels won the rebounding battle 35-21. They led the rebounding margin 16-3 at the under 8 media timeout of the first half. So Carolina, right from the jump, was getting to the offensive and the defensive glass. They had 24 defensive rebounds. They had 11 offensive rebounds, which they converted into 17 second chance points. Led by Ian Jackson, another productive game from the bench. Carolina's bench outscored Virginia's 26-19. Points in the paint in favor of Carolina, 35-22. Just 5 fast break points today for Carolina, but only 2 for Virginia, so not a big misnumber there. The Heels had 13 assists on 27 made baskets. Virginia with 11 assists on their 24 made baskets. And outside of the game being tied at 0-0, there were no ties. There were no lead changes. Carolina led for a whopping 38 minutes and 43 seconds. That now gets us to the quote of the game. And Hubert Davis was asked, as something I just mentioned here a minute ago, if there's been a greater sense of urgency, if you will, after the Clemson game. And Hubert said, quote, "Our practices from that point on have been different. They've been feisty, extremely competitive, and short-tempered. The competitive fight has been there, and whatever ends up in terms of what it looks like, I feel like we're getting better. I'm just really proud of the guys," end quote. I put this in the article that I wrote for the website. You can check that out at HeelToughBlog.com. This is the first time that I think we've seen Carolina play over a period of time. We can stretch that out to a week, week and a half, 2 weeks if you want to go four wins in 5 games. But this is really the first time I think we've seen Carolina improve from one game to the next, which is maybe a harsh bit of reality when you're saying that on February 22nd, I think today is. But I think it's the truth. Like, even back in the non-conference season, I never felt like Carolina improved from one game to the next. It was just they were finding ways to either win or finding ways to lose, and that carried over into the ACC season, even when they won those handful of games right at the beginning of January. It never felt like they were improving. because they were winning games very similarly. They were winning games close, and they were just having to make clutch plays late to win the ball game. And there's something to be said about that. But there's also something about expecting a team to improve from 1 month to the next, from one week to the next. And it feels like all of that growth has happened in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I don't, maybe I'm over exaggerating this. This looks and feels like a completely different team than what we've watched the first 24, 25 games. I don't know if you get that sense. I mean, we've hung out and watched a lot of games together. We talk on the phone during games when we're not hanging out. But this team just looks different. This team feels different. And maybe it's just as subtle as they saw that the clock was getting late on the year. I think you've got to give Jae'Lyn Withers a bunch of credit for what he's brought to the starting lineup. But there's no denying that what we've seen since the Clemson game has been linear growth in production, which has led to Carolina winning 3 straight games in very convincing fashion, the last 2 coming at home in the Smith Center.
Yeah, the thing that you're kind of worried about is that this team has done this against teams that are clearly inferior to the teams that they struggled against. I mean, outside of maybe Pittsburgh, I think Pittsburgh is a team that is probably starting to get near where Virginia was at today. Not sure if Pittsburgh ended up winning or losing their game today that they had with Notre Dame, but I know that they were locked in a battle in that one. So, I mean, if they ended up losing that game, that's a team that is no longer even average in this conference. And so I think that's, certainly one team that Carolina probably looks back on, and that matchup on the road at Pitt was probably one that they regret more than just about any that they've played so far this season. But I mean, yeah, I think, it looks like a different mindset around the team, and it looks like a more confident group. I don't know why the Syracuse game was so important for that group. But for some reason, that was really where everything started to click again. And the 2 guys that have made the biggest difference are Jae'Lyn Withers and Ian Jackson. That's where they started to find their confidence. And we said it when Carolina was going through that streak of losing 4 out of 5. The guy that needed to return to us and start playing the way that he was at the start of conference play was Ian Jackson. If he did that, then Carolina was going to be able to be successful. And that has panned out pretty much perfectly to this point. He has returned to that player that he was in these last 3 games. And all of a sudden, Carolina is not only winning these games, but controlling these games. The other thing with Withers, you're getting a guy that can stretch the floor consistently, that has size too. And his effort on the defensive end of the floor is contagious. It seems to be something that is allowing a lot of the other guys to sort of open up on that end of the floor and defend at a high enough level, or at least put the effort in to defend at a high enough level to be able to compete. I mean, you look at today, there were still moments, I thought, especially, after you get the technical foul on Jae'Lyn Withers, the team really didn't defend that great the rest of the first half. There were a lot of really good looks for Virginia that they ended up knocking down, but part of it was just that Virginia got into a bit of a rhythm. I thought the second half, Carolina came out and countered and got back to defending at a pretty high level. So I think you like to see that Carolina is just communicating better as a team. You like to see that guys are talking a little bit more. I mean, look, the technical foul, whether you agreed with it or not, was frustrating. But the thing is that I will take that any other day besides what we saw for earlier in the season from this group, which was just at times us questioning whether or not guys cared. I mean, we had that conversation multiple times, especially after the Duke game and the Clemson game, of do guys are these guys really that bothered by the fact that they are losing and getting blown out? Because it doesn't seem like they are. This is a team now, the last 2 games especially, where you've seen Carolina start to talk a little bit on the floor, both to them amongst themselves, the way that they need to be able to, and then just talking in general, just a little bit of jawing, a little bit of confidence. That's the main thing that you've seen from this group, and it's made a world of difference. And it's why you're in a position now where we can start talking seriously about Carolina closing the regular season out strong and potentially being able to sneak into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and address the flagrant foul that Jalen Washington got called for, and the technical foul that Jalen Withers got called for. That might be the two worst calls I've ever seen in my 15 plus years watching this program on a nightly basis and this sport on a nightly basis. I mean, I know we joke about ACC refs being the worst of all the power conferences. Like today, that was an example of that. And I thought Corey Alexander's almost defense, more so of the technical foul. I thought he expressed his frustration with the flagrant foul. But either way, I thought that was embarrassing as well for the ACC. Like Jalen Washington is just simply trying to fight for post position. Like, we're talking about a kid that is one of the nicest, most genuine kids on this roster. Like, you think he would do something dirty just to get post position? I wish he would. I wish he had that dog in him where he'd be in there wanting to throw some elbows and wanting to scrap and fight and claw. That's not Jalen Washington, man. And so for that call to be made, I thought was downright pathetic. And then, look, don't know what was said with Jalen Withers when he hit the three in the corner and he turned at the Virginia bench and he barked. I don't know what he said. But unless he said something that overtly crossed the line, we're now taking that out of basketball. Like, that is part of the game. And if we want to write that out of the game, then we've got a real problem. Because when I played church basketball, I mean, the amount of trash talking that happened on that court was next level. So I you were, I think, somewhat joking when you said, here are the refs trying to get them back in the game, but it got Virginia. We went from 21-2 to 24-16. And I think what happened to Carolina in those two sequences was they just kind of got put on their heels because they didn't know what was going to be deemed an excessive foul or not. Because the two things that they got called for, a flagrant and a technical foul, did not resonate. And the reason why I believe that is because Hubert Davis never once, in those sequences where when those fouls happen and there's a stoppage, never once went to Jalen Washington and yelled at him, and never once went to Jalen Withers, especially, and criticized him for picking up a technical foul, which shows me that he was more frustrated with the official in that moment as opposed to the player. So, I mean, hopefully moving forward, Carolina's got the better ACC refs this conference has to offer, because the officiating crew today does not deserve to officiate a ACC game the rest of the year, let alone one with the program that has the status of North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. In terms of the Jalen Washington one, I mean, you brought up like the character of the player. They don't really care about that, and nor should they. It really should be focused on whether or not there is an actual flagrant foul, because you never know when guys are going to do something. I mean, you could have said the same thing about a guy like Con Knipple when he ends up tripping a guy last weekend. Or that might have been 2 weekends ago. I at this point, the season is flying by so quick, I can't even keep up. But I mean, I just, to me, like, it did not seem like there was any sort of overt contact. I know they said that they went back and watched earlier in the play and there seemed to be more contact. When I saw that review, we only saw it once. I didn't think it was anything overly egregious. But, you know, Corey Alexander apparently thinks that if you hit somebody in the face twice, whether it's inadvertent or not, then that means that you get the flagrant one foul. Ridiculous. I don't think that has anything to do with it. It needs to meet the guidance of a flagrant one foul. And there's no, if you hit someone twice in the face, then it's automatically a flagrant. There is no rule like that. So didn't really understand that. But, you know, with the technical foul, I mean, look, man, I think that's part of the game. And like I said, I don't even care that was called, because I just like the fact that somebody on this team is actually talking. Someone on this team actually has a pulse and an attitude, because we were wondering, where was that this year with this team? Because it was there last year. You had Harrison Ingram, you had Cormac Ryan. And yeah, to me, did I think that, would I have called that if I was a referee? Probably not. I would have waited and seen, look, if it eventually got to where, it becomes both teams every time they hit a shot start to jaw at each other on the bench, okay, maybe then you got to step in and call a technical foul to sort of slow things down. Hell, maybe you even call a double tech, both sides, and you solve it from there. But I thought at that moment that was a little aggressive. We hadn't seen anything that sort of showed that there was, aggressive words back and forth prior to that. So personally, I would not have called it. But either way, I mean, it didn't let Virginia back into the game. I know it looked like it did at one time, but Carolina did a great job of responding and making sure that Virginia was never able to get back into the game. And, the fact of the matter is Virginia would have made a run at some point. Carolina wasn't going to win this game by 50 or 60 if those calls don't happen. They would have eventually gotten hot from three, because that's what they've done pretty much all year long. And Carolina would have had a moment where we all would have been sitting there saying, oh no, here we go. They're going to be locked in a close game. But this team kept fighting, doing what they needed to do. And, credit to them on the offensive end of the floor. I think, especially after those fouls occurred, they started struggling defensively, couldn't really get a lot of stops to close out the half. But every time that they needed to make a basket to make sure that lead stayed at a comfortable spot, they found a way to come up with it. So I'm not too worried about it. I think that's just part of the officiating in the ACC. And you said, hopefully we get the best that the ACC has. The best that the ACC has is probably the worst that any other conference has. So it's really not saying much. I think we've just learned, man, the ACC refs are as difficult to deal with as any other season that we have been around watching Tar Heel basketball, and Carolina's just got to find a way to navigate it.
Let's get now to the stat of the game. I went with the three-point shooting. As I mentioned earlier, Carolina, 9 of 16 from three. That was 57%, their best shooting night of the season in terms of percentage. The bigger thing was Virginia. They were 6 of 22, 27%. Isaac McNeely was just 2 of 7. And we stressed how important it was for Carolina to defend the three-point line. Virginia as a team shooting 38% from three. Their top 4 scorers all shot 37% or better from behind the three-point line. And with the way that Carolina raced out to that 21-2 lead, it put a lot more pressure on them to guard the three, because Virginia was going to rely on it even more to get back into the game, because we highlighted how much they struggle from scoring inside the arc when we did the preview edition of the podcast yesterday. And Carolina, I thought, for the most part, a real good job running them off the three-point line. But even more so with the way that Virginia screens, they love to use their four-man as the screener to free up their guy on the wing. I thought Carolina did a really good job fighting through those screens and being able to contest it and not allow them to have a type of shooting performance from the outside that they needed to really come in here and pull the upset, let alone be able to compete with Carolina on the road in Chapel Hill. Let's now get into some more thoughts, more takeaways from Carolina's 81-66 win at home over Virginia. We want to thank all of you that are joining us live here, whether it's via the Facebook page, the YouTube channel, or my personal Twitter space. If you're on Twitter and you haven't followed me yet, make sure you give me a follow at HTB_Josh. We're running a little late tonight, but a big reason why is there were a lot of good basketball games going on, a lot of important basketball games going on that we wanted to monitor before getting on here to talk about them. The Jalen Withers effect is real. 16 point, 10 rebound, double-double today. I thought he was the best player on the floor for Carolina. And, I've kind of referenced this previously, and I'm still not willing to go as far as it's the same comparison. But when Brady Manick changed Carolina's season 4 years ago, it was in this time frame. It was in February. It was when Carolina was with their backs against the wall and they had to win out to make the tournament. And, he got, hot from three. I think he shot was like 45% over the last 6 weeks of the year while shooting a high percentage, a high volume of threes. Jalen Withers isn't doing that. He's not shooting the three ball at a high volume, but he's shooting it very efficiently, which is helping keep the floor spread for Carolina. But I think more than anything, and kind of like Brady did the same thing when he became a starter, he's brought an edge to this team with the way that they start out. There's a different energy. There's a different vibe. There's a different attitude with him. He's competed his butt off defensively. He's become a difference maker on the glass. And then, as we mentioned there with the technical foul, that guy has no problem talking. Despite averaging 5 points and 4 rebounds entering today's game, he doesn't mind jawing. And I think this group of starters that is a lot more quiet, that's a lot more do it by example type of guys, I think they feed off of that. I think they respond to that. And I just find it hard to believe, as critical as I've been of Jalen Withers, that I'm looking at the impact he is having on this team right now and really wondering and questioning why it took so long for him to become a starter. Because it just feels like if this move would have been made back in January, and I know that would have been complicated with the emergence of Ian Jackson, and we were so confident that Carolina's best lineup was 4 guards and 1 big. But, man, there's no denying that this is the best version of Carolina. It's 2 bigs, 2 forwards, or 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a big. That's the best version of this Carolina team. And Jalen Withers is a big reason why. And for as critical as I've been of him, really enjoying the success he is having individually that is leading to the overall collective collection success of this team right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there are going to be a lot of people that are going to ask that question of why he wasn't in the starting lineup earlier in the year. But we got to remember, man, there was a period of time where this dude wasn't even playing for Carolina because he just was not giving you anything when he was on the floor. He was a guy that was making mistakes almost every time he was out there. And so I get it. I get why now in hindsight, it looks like, okay, you should have put him out there earlier, but maybe that's what he needed, was to just get to this point, to fall out of the rotation and have to be motivated to get back to where he is now, which is the type of player that we saw he was capable of being when he was at Louisville. This was always there. That was what was so frustrating, was that we saw it at Louisville. And I get it, man. That Louisville team was really, really bad under Kenny Payne. There's a reason why he chose to leave and come to Carolina. But he was still the second leading scorer on that team. So there was something always there offensively. But now it seems like something has been unlocked in him. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's that, what was being said about him from the fan base, not just from you, but from, many people collectively around the fan base. Maybe it just got to him. And now he's sort of turned back into that player that he was there at Louisville. I'm not going to question it, because here's the thing. If this is the time that it had to happen, then that's perfect. Because if Carolina sneaks into the NCAA tournament, whether it's by beating Duke or if they go to Charlotte and have success, we're not going to worry about the fact that, they didn't go to it early enough. As long as you are playing your best basketball at this point in the season, that's what matters. And I think we're starting to get to that point. I think, in order to, full on believe, and I think be all in and think that, okay, Carolina's really found something. And now not only do they have a chance to close out this stretch that we were talking about, this key 5-game stretch undefeated, they have a chance to actually compete and potentially even beat Duke in their own building. We're going to have to see it in this game coming up on Monday night against Florida State. But if we see it there, then I think we can really say that this is something meaningful. And I think with Jalen Withers, unless there is something stunning, I don't see this falling off. And what's been so different, and I said it a little bit earlier, your ability to stretch the floor from that 4 spot is huge. It was missing all year long. We said, who is going to be able to give it to us? We thought for a while it was Drake Powell. Drake Powell's 6'6". He was playing out of position. He needed to play at that 3 spot. He's been better since Carolina has played him primarily there. And there's been another big that's been out there. I mean, a guy 6'9" like Jalen Withers, maybe you don't classify him as a big, but still he brings more size. He brings more rebounding ability to the floor. It takes pressure off of Powell. He's been better. And, we were expecting maybe Cade Tyson would be that guy too. I think Cade's very similar to Drake Powell. I don't think that Cade is comfortable with being that 4 guy. I just don't think that's his position. Maybe if Carolina plays him in that 3 spot a little bit more here down the stretch, maybe that he can show you that he's comfortable there. That was the most confident we've seen him taking a 3-point shot against a legitimate opponent this season, because State, not really that legitimate of an opponent. I don't care that they went and beat Wake Forest today. That certainly helps you. It helps you in multiple ways, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I definitely think that today was a big moment even for him. Just hitting that shot, even only playing 4 minutes. If Carolina needs him to be out on the floor, you feel a little bit more confident in him. And I think it's all the pieces are finally falling into place, hopefully, here for Carolina, and it looks like it. But it's all led by what Jalen Withers is doing.
And one last thing on Jalen Withers before we move on. I do think what helps him is kind of what helped and fuel Brady Manek. These are the last games Jalen Withers will ever play at the college level. So there is a sense of urgency for him. And for a guy that grew up in the Charlotte area, I would imagine grew up wanting to become a Carolina basketball player, was a part of what Carolina did a year ago, but does not want his legacy to be what right now his legacy would be, which is a guy that made the 2 biggest mistakes in a tournament game that cost Carolina a chance to go back to the Final Four. And so I think for him, it's trying to really be a part of this late season surge to where, because I do think if Carolina gets into the tournament, whether they go deep or not, we'll think differently about him, because he's going to be a big reason why they go dancing. It'll still be a part of his conversation. Legacy's too big of a word for a role player like him, but it may not be, whenever we think of Jalen Withers, we'll know the Alabama game happened, but we also might be able to say, hey, he was a big part of what Carolina did in 24-25 in terms of making the tournament. Maybe he's a big part of a big win at Duke over at home, winning an ACC tournament title, no matter what it is. And I do think that has really helped him since he's been reinserted into the starting lineup. Second takeaway, I think it's fair to welcome back Ian Jackson to the 2024-2025 basketball season. He was sensational once again today. 16 points, 5 of 7 shooting, 3 of 3 from the 3-point line. He did all of this in just 17 minutes. So what you saw very early on in conference play, high efficiency. I mean, he averaged nearly a point per minute while he was on the floor. Shot selection was sensational. His ability to make tough shots was sensational. He hit another guarded 3 today that there's nothing anyone in that gym could have done. Like, because he's that good, the ball was going in the basket. I think rim pressure, putting the ball on the floor, taking it through traffic to where it's not going to get stolen or batted away, and being able to either finish through the contact or draw a foul, much better. He hit that midseason rookie wall, and it came at the worst time for Carolina because they need his scoring. Carolina feels more explosive with Ian Jackson, but he goes to Hubert Davis. They have a couple film sessions, and lo and behold, the guy that we saw early on in conference play has returned. The guy that we said that we were both on here saying, hey, we know RJ is the 5th-year man. We know RJ is the All-American, the preseason player of the year, blah, blah, blah. You need to run your offense through Ian Jackson. That version of him is back, and you combine that with what this bigger lineup is giving Carolina defensively, what this bigger lineup is giving Carolina from a rebounding perspective. It's allowed them to win 3 straight games. It's allowed them to win 4 out of their last 5, and that's why it has us both on here flirting and full-blown crushing on Carolina as we go down the stretch here in ACC play.
Yeah, I mean, he's unlocked what we saw from him earlier in conference play, which is just a confident player that when he gets hot, it's impossible to slow him down scoring-wise. That's the guy that we knew he was capable of being. And he went through that stretch there. That's something that you're going to see with freshmen. He hit that wall in the middle of the season. And now he knows that, hey, when you go through that stretch, you can't get down on yourself. You can't just be focused on what's going on and how things are just so bad right now. You've got to be able to get yourself out of that space, because now you're starting to see a guy that is controlling everything that he's doing on the offensive end of the floor. The turnover issues that he was having are gone. He has just 1 turnover in today's game. Really did a good job defensively. That's another area where you've seen him step up. But the way that he is able to create some of those step back shots off the dribble is just phenomenal. And that's when you know that he is playing well on offense, because when he was struggling, he became a catch and shoot type of guy. And that's really just not his game. There is that element. There's times where he is able to do that, where he can catch the ball and just throw up a 3 and knock it down. But it's pretty rare, especially for plays that are going to result in, 2 points for him, that he's not a guy that's doing something to create space and create his own offense. And you saw it again today, that's where he's at his best. I mean, 5 of 7 in this game, incredibly efficient from him after, even earlier in the season. You go back to those games where, he was succeeding, scoring in the 20s, consistently, still wasn't shooting the ball very efficiently. During this stretch, he's been extremely efficient with the shots that he's had. And part of that is he has to be in order to score, because he's not playing nearly as many minutes, but it's working out better for him. You look at the 3 threes that he hits in this game. Man, you combine that with what Jae'Lyn Withers did. Those guys hit 7 out of the 9 threes that Carolina had today. So if you're looking for the guys that have turned this season around, and we asked this question over and over again in the middle of the season when Carolina was struggling, we said, who is going to actually be the guy that can turn it around this year, that's going to allow you to go on the type of run that you did back in Hubert's first season? And the answer was Jae'Lyn Withers. But the big thing was we needed Ian Jackson to return to being the guy that he was, and he has now. And you're seeing that those two combined, even though they're not playing in the starting lineup together, they are playing a lot out on the floor together. And when those two are out there together, that's when Carolina is at their best right now.
Did want to mention, as we move along here with our takeaways from tonight's game, we talked about it a few minutes ago with the officiating. I did think, Carolina did a really good job navigating that. I know it was 21-2 and it became 24-16, but we've seen at different points in time this year when things would go against Carolina's way. That's when they would, hang their head. That's when they would pout. And that's effectively when the game would change. And it felt like they weren't mentally tough enough to handle adversity, and they weren't tough enough to respond from things going against their way. And I thought that was today was a really good example of them fighting back, because you see a 19-point lead evaporate in about a 2-3 minute span, because, the officials gifted them really 8 points, and then they made a couple shots off of that. And then something that you said earlier, Carolina had a response. It felt like every time Virginia tried to make a mini push, a mini run, and Corey Alexander, who's a Virginia alum, is on the broadcast willing them to come back in the game. And we're not going to give up without a fight. You got to play 40 minutes, blah, blah, blah. Well, Carolina did that. And again, I think that's just something that's different about where this team is right now than where it was a few weeks ago. Because, and maybe you disagree with me, I feel like a few weeks ago, if all that stuff transpires, then Carolina's in for a dogfight the rest of the way.
Mhm.
And Carolina's going to have to grind out the victory. That wasn't the case. Carolina was up 12 at the half. They won by 15, and the game was never really in question. The game was never really threatened after that initial kind of pushback from Virginia, which, look, this is an ACC team that does have some talent. They were always going to make some sort of a run to get back into the game. But I thought Carolina did a really good job responding to that, and that has not been something we could say that this team has done every time they've been hit in the mouth, whether it's out of the gate, during the middle of the game, or heaven forbid at the end of the game.
Yeah, and like I said, I think where they really countered was offensively because Virginia got into a rhythm. I mean, they started the game 1 of 10 from the field, and then at one point they were 9 of their next 12. So they started hitting basically everything. A lot of these shots were coming from the outside where, we said that Carolina had to be careful with this group, and they just seemed to get into a rhythm. And so it would have been really easy. You're right. You go back a couple of weeks ago. Hell, you could even go back to last weekend when they played against Syracuse. If that same thing happens in that game, Syracuse probably ties the game or takes a lead, and then Carolina has to find a way to counter it. But something happened with that state game that sort of changed this group where now, you see it today. Carolina does a really good job of countering that by being able to score themselves and keep that lead at a safe spot. And you mentioned it. They go into halftime with the 12-point lead. Even that, could have been an area where you felt like, okay, we could have extended the lead right before the half. Elliot Cadeau just doesn't get the shot off. Well, hopefully Virginia doesn't come out and counter there. Carolina never had Virginia that close again the rest of the game. They did a great job of making sure that they controlled everything. They controlled the tempo of the game, which was very important because you wanted to do that against a Virginia team that wants to slow things down, create the turnovers. But Carolina did a really good job. Anytime they would turn the ball over, it seemed like they would counter by being able to create a turnover the other way. So just a complete performance from this group and a great job of adjusting to the situations that they were put in this game. That's what you got to do, man, to be able to control these games. And that's what's so different from what we saw earlier in the season, where every game that Carolina played, it felt like they were the team that was being controlled. They were the team that was just playing with the rhythm of the other team. And hey, sometimes it would work out. I mean, hell, you go back to that UCLA game. Man, Carolina didn't play their game in that one. They just found a way down the stretch to be able to out-execute them because I think we've seen it at this point, and we could say it at this point. Carolina is just that good of an offensive team. So, I mean, for this team now to really be controlling the games that they're playing in, I think that's important, and that's part of the recipe for Carolina to be able to beat Duke in a couple of weeks. If they're going to do it, they have to be able to control that game, and this is where they have to get their practice in right now.
You mentioned the 1 of 10 start from the field for Virginia. What that allowed Carolina to do was establish a rebounding presence on the glass. They bullied State on the boards earlier this week. I think it was 40-21 on Wednesday night. Tonight it was 35-21 in favor of Carolina. 24-18 on the defensive glass. And then how about 11-3 on the offensive glass? And Carolina got 17 second chance points off those 11 offensive rebounds. It looks like vintage Carolina basketball on the boards. And yes, it's because they're bigger with Withers, as you mentioned, 6'9", as opposed to having the guards there or whatever. And that's a big part of it. I think also there's a different want to now from this team and that's something that I think Hubert has been, very consistent in his messaging. It's a UNC rebounding game. It's a UNC rebounding game. It's a UNC rebounding game. And there have been some games we got to the board and we rebounded the ball the way we expect Carolina to. It hasn't been as consistent, though. This has been one of the more frustrating rebounding teams to watch in my life. And that's saying something when you know how much I consider rebounding. I think it's more important than making shots, because if you rebound the ball, that means you have the ball. But I don't think what's happened in the last 2 games is by accident. Yes, you can look at the stats and say that Carolina should out-rebound State, and they did. And they should out-rebound Virginia, and they did. But Carolina's plummeting teams, and they're bullying teams, and they're getting to the boards with ease and with a lot of success. The best part about the defensive rebounding is it feels like now they're running off of misses more, and there's a sense of urgency to run the ball up the opponent's backside and at least get into your initial action before the defense gets set. And when Ian Jackson's on the floor, that usually leads to a layup or a foul, which is good, initial for a first break offense. It's efficient offense. And I think it's a big reason why Carolina is scoring the points that they're scoring much more efficiently. And so, we've seen this team at times get overwhelmed and be bullied on the glass. I don't think that's going to happen moving forward. I think Carolina, with this lineup moving down the stretch, your best statistical rebounder still coming off the bench in Seth Trimble. I think Carolina's better equipped now to hang in there with the Duke in a couple weeks if they get a rematch with Clemson in the ACC tournament. Some of these other teams that really bullied them on the glass throughout the early part of the year, I think this version of what Carolina is what you expect from them in terms of rebounding from a numbers perspective. And it's another big reason why everything looks and feels different about this team as we sit here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you start the game out, you get the first 11 rebounds. Like, when was the last time you could say that about Carolina, even with some of their really good rebounding teams? It's felt like it's been a while. And yeah, part of it is that Virginia is not a good rebounding team. Part of it is that NC State is not a good rebounding team. But you go back before the lineup switch, and Carolina, even against teams that weren't great rebounding wise, they were struggling. They were, either drawing even or, God forbid, losing the rebounding battle to teams that in years past, they would not have even come close to losing the rebounding battle to. And tonight, it was just so important, again, with being able to limit the opportunities for Virginia. You never want to give that team second chance opportunities because it drains so much of the clock, and that's what they want to do. They want to shorten the game, and they want to make it to where you have to score in the 50s, 60s to be able to win. I gave you that stat, and hell, I got it wrong because I was trying to do the quick counting the other day when we were previewing this game. Look, man, this team was 2-9 in games where they scored, where the opponent scored 70 or more points. Now they're 2-10 because Carolina, when they were able to get those rebounds, they got out. They were either, there were a few times where Carolina would run down the floor, but, just being able to limit those second chance opportunities for Virginia was so huge. And that's incredibly important when you got a team that shoots the way that they do from the outside. Because if you get an offensive rebound, kick it back out, and they hit a three, that's a much more impactful play than even what you could do on the other end of the floor, which was, get a rebound with Jalen Withers or Vin Allen-Lubin and go right back up and finish. And that's what Carolina did today. On that offensive end of the floor, it was really those two guys. I mean, 7 of the 11 offensive rebounds came from those two guys. And they were the main reason that Carolina had 17 second chance points on the glass, because they got the rebounds, they went back up, and they finished. Drake Powell got a key offensive rebound, ends up drawing a foul, goes to the foul line. These are the hustle plays that we have wanted to see from Carolina all year. And you go back to that Syracuse game, that was one of the little things that Carolina was able to do in that game that made a difference. And Hubert Davis pointed that out. And since that point, Carolina has been able to make those plays on the offensive glass that have led to second chance points. And so, you look at the first half, Carolina 11 first or second chance opportunities, second chance points rather. Guys, it's late. Second chance points in the first half. That's pretty much the halftime difference. You take those points out, which earlier in the season you could basically do for Carolina, and you're talking about a 1-point game. So that is just huge for Carolina. Now guys are starting to impact the game there, especially a guy like Ven-Allen Lubin, which that was where his strength was when he came from Vanderbilt. You go back and watch his highlights. He was an offensive rebound machine that found a way to finish second chance points inside. And it took him a little bit of time, but he's made the adjustment here at Carolina, and now it's starting to work. And that's huge for Carolina here as they go down the stretch of the season, especially when they get in a game against Duke, where if they can create those same second chance opportunities, they're going to have a chance to have a pretty successful night.
No discussion topic tonight because we've kind of illustrated that throughout the episode so far, which was, I think it's fair to say, our belief is as high as it's been all year long about this team. At this rate, having a legitimate chance to salvage the season and at least put on their dancing shoes and make the NCAA tournament. So with that, kind of an impromptu thing, but something that I think now we're on the eve of 3 weeks away from Selection Sunday. Believe it or not, guys, we're tomorrow, mark 3 weeks before we get that bracket and we get the tournament underway. Is the best event in sports is right around the corner. With Carolina firmly on the bubble, we got to talk about the bubble moving forward. And today was a big day for the bubble. Teams that got significant wins: Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Boise State, and Villanova all secured wins today. But teams that suffered losses: San Diego State, Wake Forest with a god-awful loss of NC State in a game that might end up costing Steve Forbes his job there, and Winston-Salem, SMU got blown out once again by a quality opponent, this time by the Clemson Tigers. And Georgia was competitive on the road against number 1 Auburn, but they ultimately were not able to get the victory. Joe Lunardi, we're now at that time where he'll be updating his brackets probably hourly now throughout the rest of the regular season as we get closer and closer to the start of Champ Week. He has Carolina among the first 4 out, but they've now moved up from the number 72 team to the number 70 team, which means they're now the second team out of the tournament right now. We watched Oklahoma get the win that they got today. We saw a little bit of the Vanderbilt game that they got in their win over Ole Miss. We got on here so late because we were watching Arkansas get the win over Missouri at home there. We also saw Georgia get beat, and we saw SMU get beat. The thing I said when we were kind of sitting here talking and going through this, and this happens every year. The bubble, while it's starting to take shape, it is starting to soften up. And there is now, I think, a much more clearer path for Carolina to make the tournament today than we felt like 2 weeks ago. And part of that's because Carolina's winning and they're playing well and they're stringing together a handful of consecutive outings here. But you're starting to see teams lose some games that it's just hard to come back from, like a Wake Forest who lost to NC State. Look at SMU, talking about a team that legitimately doesn't have a quad 1 win. Like they didn't have a win on their resume to write home about. And while, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma and Arkansas all got big wins in the SEC today, those are still schools that are all at least 3 games or worse below 500 in their conference. And I do think as we get closer to the tournament, if those numbers stay the same, that will become a big talking point. But yes, they've got quad 1 wins. They got a lot of quad 1 opportunities, but it's very rare you see teams that are as well below 500 like an Oklahoma is, like an Arkansas is, find themselves into the big dance come Selection Sunday. Just because it's hard to really fathom a team that's got double-digit losses in conference being one of the better at-large teams in terms of fielding a tournament of 68 teams to go compete for an NCAA tournament championship. When you look at the bubble right now and where Carolina is, what do you feel about their chances as opposed to where we felt after the Clemson loss a week and a half ago?
Oh, I mean, it's definitely much better. And I think, you look at some of the teams that are around them. I mean, Vanderbilt, I think, is in. I think they should be a team that should be locked into the tournament. They've picked up some big wins throughout the season, and I think that the only reason that they're still on the bubble is frankly because they're Vanderbilt. That's really it. I mean, you look at their record so far this year, 18-9, 6-8 in the SEC. I think that's a team that should be in. One team that's not on there that I think will probably be, closer to the bubble than Joe Lunardi thinks is Texas. That was a team that just lost today to South Carolina, a team that had not won a game in conference leading into today. That's a horrendous loss for them. So, yeah, they've picked up some important victories. They had one the other night. But is that going to really carry over after you lose a game like that? And then, you look at the two ACC teams, I think Carolina right now is better than them. I know that Carolina didn't beat Wake Forest. That game should not mean more than them losing to this NC State team, especially after Carolina beat them in the middle of this week by 24 points. That should show you everything that you need to know about Wake Forest. They do not deserve to be a tournament team. Unless they find a way to pull an upset against Duke, which I definitely do not see happening at this point, there is no way that team should be in the NCAA tournament. SMU, that is not a tournament team. We have watched them multiple times this year. Carolina dismantled that team earlier in the season when they were fully healthy. Right now, team that is not necessarily fully healthy, and that's a big part of the reason why I think they might be struggling the way that they are, is because Boopie Miller has been fighting through an injury, but it doesn't matter. That's not a tournament team, especially not the way that they defend. And so I think those two teams should clearly be behind Carolina. I believe Wake Forest is still in the field as of right now. If I remember correctly, I think they're the last team in. And then, Georgia, in another interesting case. But, I think Oklahoma is in the tournament field as of right now. Georgia is not. Georgia, much better team than Oklahoma. You look at some of the wins that they have on their resume, I think it's better. St. John's, for one, is probably the best win that either one of those two teams have. Michigan is up there for Oklahoma. I know that certainly is a much better win than people probably thought going into the season. But I would probably put Georgia in the field over Oklahoma. It's going to be interesting to see how they value these SEC teams, because I feel like the experts want you to believe they're going to put 13, maybe even 14 teams in the tournament from the SEC because of how great that conference is. But in reality, is the committee going to view that conference as being as great as some people think? They're still, even if they get 12 in, that's still a major accomplishment, but that leaves an extra spot. And the team that's ahead of Carolina right now, look, I don't know. I haven't watched them so far this year. I'll get a good look at them, especially when the A-10 tournament is going on. I don't really know how good George Mason is. They lose today to VCU. They lose by 15 in that game. VCU now expected to get the automatic qualifier, and George Mason is the first team out of the tournament field. To me, if it came down to Carolina and George Mason, they are putting Carolina in the field, because Carolina plays a much better strength of schedule than George Mason does. That's a team that feels more battle-tested, and I would think that the brand would probably give Carolina a shot. So, yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident about where Carolina is at right now, that as long as they take care of business in the games that they need to, they're going to have a decent chance of making it into the NCAA tournament. And I think really, depending on what they do, I think as long as they beat Florida State and some of these teams around them continue to help them, which the SEC teams, I think, they're going to beat up on each other. So I think it certainly is possible that Carolina gets the help that they need. Then I think there's a chance they don't have to beat Duke. They don't have to make it to the ACC finals. Even if they make it to the ACC semifinals, they might have a chance to get themselves into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it all plays out. I do know, for George Mason, their story is incredible. They're coached by a member of their Final Four team from 2006. So it's pretty remarkable that a former player has now got them in position to either win the A-10 and make a return to the dance, or maybe get in as an at-large. But I do think, that's one that if that's the team Carolina's going down the stretch run with, this is where the way Carolina played in November and December and who they played matters. Now, granted, they didn't beat those teams, but you do get rewarded for playing those types of games and challenging yourself. And that could be a spot where Carolina's strength of record could ultimately push them over the top. The best thing to do is to win the type of games you need to win to not make this a talking point, i.e. beat Duke. Carolina wins out and they beat Duke during the tournament, no matter what happens in Charlotte in the ACC tournament. That team's going dancing. And that's a tall task. We all saw what Duke did tonight against an Illinois team that I do think when Illinois is healthy and is right, could make the second weekend of the tournament. But nonetheless, that's what Carolina has to do. But the bubble is softening up, and there is becoming a much clearer path, a much more direct path to make the tournament than we all initially thought 2 weeks ago. One last thing to do before we get out of here. It's a victory recap podcast. That means we're handing out some game balls. I'll do the honors and go first. And at this point, I can't run from it. I got to give Jae'Lyn Withers the credit where the credit is due. You put up a 16-point, a 10-rebound, or 11-rebound double-double in 29 minutes in a blowout win over Virginia while going 5 of 8 from the field and 4 of 6 from 3. You're going to get a game ball from me. So for the first time this year, Jae'Lyn Withers gets a game ball from me. Who gets a game ball for you for today's win over the Cavs?
He got it in the last game for me. Ian Jackson has to be the guy that gets it in this game because I thought he was just fantastic once again. I mentioned it, 5 of 7 from the field, a very efficient game for him. Tied with Jae'Lyn Withers for the most points of anybody on the team, and did that all in just 17 minutes as opposed to Withers, who played 29 minutes. But 3 of 3 from beyond the arc, 3 of 4 from the foul line. Like I said, he's done a good job of holding on to the basketball, and I think he's been competing more on the defensive end of the floor. So it's only fitting that the two guys that are so important to this run are the guys that step up today and that get our game balls, because without those two guys, who knows where this season would currently be for Carolina.
Yep, fair enough. And we're going to need these guys to continue to play at a high level down the home stretch of ACC play. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners podcast. In the meantime, guys, we do encourage you to visit the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. The recap of the win is posted for you guys if you want to go and check that out. Quick turnaround for the team means a quick turnaround for me. I'll be back with the Florida State preview for you guys. It'll be made available for you on Monday morning as I continue to take you through the basketball season. Anthony has you covered on all things Carolina football recruiting, the team getting involved with some of the major prospects in the 26 and 27 classes. He has you covered with that. We got the spring football schedule. GM Michael Lombardi laid that out for you on Friday. Go and check out what it looks like for Bill Belichick as he gets ready for his first spring practice as the head coach of the Tar Heels. Simply put, guys, we tell you this all the time, but we mean it. We encourage you to visit the website every single morning, afternoon, and evening for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage around. There's at least 1 to 2 articles going up on the website every single day. So make sure you visit the website so you don't miss any of our coverage of those 2 programs. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. We're on every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. We're there. We humbly encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the season. Programming note, Carolina back in action on Monday night. We'll be live back here on the YouTube channel, the Facebook page, and my Twitter account on Sunday night to preview that game. So make sure you familiarize yourself with those 3 locations to be a part of Sunday night's live broadcast ahead of Monday night's game at Florida State. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.